Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. Love ya. I'm gonna be reacting to why United States won't win World War III. I don't know. We'll give him a chance. Let him see.
0032 hours, April 29th, 2022. A massive Chinese fleet made up of several dozen destroyers, 2 aircraft carriers, and dozens of troop
Why is it so specific?
transport and landing dock ships push off from their rally point a few miles off the Chinese coast. Their destination, Taiwan, and a forceful reunification of the breakaway country. Beneath the waves, an American Seawolf submarine sits and observes the situation, relaying a burst transmission to the rest of the American military via extreme low-frequency communications. It's a Cold War relic, but still the quietest submarine in the world, and the Chinese subs hunting for American interceptors are much noisier than it. The burst transmission alerts the Chinese to its presence, but resting near the bottom of the Taiwanese Strait, the submarine is virtually invisible. The invasion warning reaches the top echelons of the U.S. military within minutes. American President Joe Biden made it clear within months of taking office that he would defend the Taiwanese people and their democracy with military force if necessary. The Chinese invasion fleet has taken weeks to amass, and the U.S. has had plenty of opportunity to make its own preparations. Spread out across the Pacific are 3 American carrier strike groups, each made up of just under 100 combat aircraft and escort vessels for the big carriers. On Guam, American bombers, drones, and fighter aircraft have been pre-positioned inside hardened bunkers, and U.S. aircraft across South Korea, Japan, and the greater southeastern Pacific have long been on alert. But just as word is reaching the Oval Office that the Chinese are initiating their invasion of Taiwan, the United States is the first to come under attack. The United States and China both wield considerable counterforce power, and both know that the stakes for not striking first could mean a knockout blow before the war even begins. The U.S. has prepared as best it could by
knockout blow before it begins? How?
moving aircraft into hardened facilities and dispersing its naval forces, but with an arsenal of hundreds of long and intermediate range missiles.
Does he mean knockout, like, temporarily? Like, just out of the war from the first... I mean, the only way I can see that happening is from nuclear bomb. Because, I mean, even if you sort of just raided, like, did a regular bombing run on an American city or something, even in Washington, D.C., I feel like they would have contingency plan for that.
The People's Liberation Army Rocket Force is the first to draw blood. 200 ballistic missiles rained down on American military installations in Japan, the Philippines, and Thailand. The strike has come as a complete surprise. Chinese anti-satellite weapons have...
Oh my gosh. Complete surprise. Complete surprise! This is probably where America's intelligence community is focusing the most in terms of international, things. The biggest threat to America. So, a complete surprise. This is just a made-up thing, clearly.
Blinded or hacked American recon satellites in orbit, meant to detect the thermal plumes of missile launches. Some of the missiles are aimed at specific targets, such as radar and communications hubs, while others disperse cratering munitions to knock runways out of operations. Yet others shower down smaller warheads across a wide area, destroying or seriously damaging hundreds of American and Japanese aircraft. This bolt out of the blue is a modern-day Pearl Harbor, and it's only just begun. Next, the PLARF's intermediate-range ballistic missiles begin to rain down on American ships across the South Pacific.
If anybody doesn't know, PLA stands for People's Liberation Army, which is the military of China.
Across the South Pacific, 2 of the American carrier groups are in range of the strike, and despite a robust defense by fleet ballistic missile defense systems, 1 carrier takes 2 direct hits and is sunk. 5,500 American sailors are killed in a matter of seconds, the fastest mass loss of life in U.S. military history. A second carrier survives the barrage, but is seriously damaged and considered a mission kill. Along with the loss of a dozen escort vessels, the United States has suffered the worst defeat in its military history and a financial loss of over $20 billion. Redundant systems mitigate the effects of Chinese anti-satellite attacks within minutes, allowing the United States military to get a clearer picture of the final phase of the ballistic missile Pearl Harbor it's currently enduring. The third wave of attacks come from China's 100 or so long-range ballistic missiles, which are targeted at bases in Australia, Guam, the U.S.'s most important Pacific base, and Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean. The advance warning of a few minutes allows a few alert aircraft to scream into the sky before they're destroyed on their paths, and the U.S. missile defenses throw up a cloud of steel attempting to defend the most important American military installations in the world. But stopping a fire truck-sized missile traveling many times the speed of sound is extremely difficult. and no nation in the world has ever mastered ballistic missile defenses. Runways, fuel depots, ammunition storage, and troop barracks are destroyed in seconds, with an additional 15,000 American airmen, sailors, and Marines dying in the attacks. It's 45 minutes into World War III, and China has already expended half of its missile forces. It will hold the rest in reserve to threaten American vessels and make sure its invasion of Taiwan goes unopposed by the U.S. There's more at stake here than one island democracy, though. The very fate of the world in the 21st century hangs in the balance. A military defeat of the United States signals a new top dog on the world stage, and China is very eager to shape the world in its own authoritarian image. Chinese fighters based on artificial islands that the country has been illegally building in the South Pacific for over a decade ensure air dominance across the most vulnerable approaches of the invasion fleet. With 2 carriers out of the fight and dozens of long-range air defense missile batteries spread out across China.
He said illegally building. I mean, depends on what you consider legal. You know, once it comes to international law, it's just made up and agreed upon by various countries. So, I mean, there's no world government, at least not out in the open. So, there's no one to. There's no government to declare it illegal. There is no law for the world. So, anyway, yeah, this is I don't know if this video was just meant to rile people up. I'm not saying these things couldn't happen, but like, I've heard a lot of things from videos of people who like kind of lay out what they think would happen in Ukraine. They kind of, and some of them have been pretty good, but even like the ones that are pretty good still are, they got a lot of things that wrong that they predicted, and this is stating as if it's like fact. It's kind of silly, but anyway, let's finish.
As unsinkable island aircraft carriers, American air power can't hope to threaten the Chinese Navy from the south. The attack on Taiwan is only vulnerable from the north, but the thorough destruction on joint American and Japanese military bases has forced the 2 nations to base their surviving air forces from civilian airfields. These too come under sporadic attack, though Japan's missile defense forces do a fair job of shooting down the older generation missiles China has left in its inventory. China may have launched attacks on Japanese soil, but it has purposefully avoided sending troops to disputed Senkaku Islands. This was a calculated move, as Japan still has a strong pacifist streak. The attacks on its military installations angered many Japanese, but the savagery of the great missile attack in history has intimidated much of the Japanese people. If China is able to so thoroughly decimate the nation's military airfields, what could it do against its population centers? It's textbook American shock and awe, only this time used against its own friends. The Japanese Prime Minister meets with his cabinet to make an important decision. Will Japan join the U.S. in its war against China? While the U.S. is treaty-bound to defend Japan in case of attacks, the reverse is not true, and the situation looks grim. Much of U.S. firepower in the Pacific has either been destroyed or seriously degraded. Diego Garcia and Guam are out of commission, leaving the U.S. with...
Australia and New Zealand certainly don't have like anywhere near the power militarily that the U.S. does, but they still have a decent amount of power. I mean, they obviously would, especially if Australia was being attacked, they would step in and play a role.
Few staging areas for an offensive against China. The loss of 2 of its carrier strike groups have reduced American firepower in the region.
The loss of its he just says, okay, whatever.
By as much as 30%. Even with reinforcements from Central and European Command, there's simply few places the United States can stage a counterstrike against the Chinese from. And China still has hundreds of medium-range missiles, along with over 1,000 short-range ones. Japan has made its decision. It will not join the U.S. in its fight against China. Further, to avoid an expansion of missile strikes on its own shores, Japan forbids the U.S. from launching combat operations from airfields on its sovereign soil. American installations on Japan may be used for humanitarian purposes, but American combat aircraft cannot fly from the island nation to strike at Chinese forces. The loss of Japanese support is crippling for America's ability to fight the Chinese. While the U.S. has encircled China with military installations, China has countered the U.S. presence with a network of anti-air and anti-ship defenses, known as Anti-Access Area Denial, or A2AD. The network's Chinese defenses have made it extremely hazardous for American ships or aircraft to come within hundreds of miles of Chinese forces. The U.S. is not completely helpless, though, and American submarine forces devastate the Chinese Navy over the coming days. China's anti-submarine warfare capabilities are severely lacking, and U.S. subs are deadly quiet. However, losses mount over time, and with no surface vessels to exploit the losses inflicted by U.S. submarines, the effort fails to turn the tide of the invasion of Taiwan. Chinese invasion forces are further devastated by American standoff attack weapons launched from a variety of long-range aircraft. A flurry of anti-ship and ground strike missiles pound Chinese forces, inflicting great losses. However, Taiwan is less than a day from a heavily militarized Chinese coast, and replenishing even the previous losses incurred by the invasion is relatively simple without the U.S. surface navy to threaten the effort. International outrage against China burns red hot, but the nation is much of the world's greatest trading partner. With 1.4 billion potential customers, corporations from around the world have made gaining access to Chinese markets a top priority for decades. Now the massive
that's been turning around in the last few years, though.
economic clout wielded by China helps deflect much of the world's anger. While many condemn China for its invasion, nobody but the UK and Australia are willing to back up their words with military action. However, without the US Navy's support, there is little that even a joint fleet can do to break through the tough Chinese defenses in the South Pacific. The US may have been knocked out of the Pacific, but it is by no means defeated. Over the coming weeks, the largest naval battle group in American history is assembled off the coast of California, pulling together vessels from across American global commands. It's a concentration of firepower unseen in world history, and while losses will be extraordinarily high in the face of the Chinese A2AD defenses, the fleet is determined to break into the first island chain and to try to relieve the pressure on Taiwan. By now, though, Chinese forces have occupied much of the small island nation. The Taiwanese have put up a fierce defense of their island, and Chinese losses have been astronomical. Without U.S. naval and air power to seriously threaten the invasion forces' replenishment and resupply operations, though, the unending tidal wave of manpower from mainland China has overwhelmed Taiwan's defenders. The resistance has fallen back to the central mountains, where heavy cover gives some protection from China's complete air superiority. Most of Taiwan's heavy equipment, including tanks, field artillery, and attack helicopters, has been destroyed by now. And while a guerrilla resistance could rage for years, China is in effect in control of the island. Hunted down by Chinese special forces, the Taiwanese president is forced to concede and accepts China's reunification of the island. Without U.S. support, there is no point in continuing the bloodshed. Over 100,000 Taiwanese have been killed or seriously injured, inflicting 4 times that number on the Chinese invaders. But defeat is inevitable, and under threat of more violence from China, the Taiwanese president surrenders. The United States is shocked by the sudden surrender. China has now completely secured the first island chain past its naval borders, and it quickly turns Taiwan into an island fortress. The American attack will now have to break through even tougher defenses than before, but the death blow to the U.S. war plans comes with Taiwan's official surrender. Whatever international support the U.S. had going into the war, it has quickly lost. The matter of Taiwan has been officially and violently resolved, and nobody feels like joining the U.S. in the massive loss of life it will take to restore Taiwanese independence, especially not with the equally massive hit to global trade that will come from full-scale war between the U.S. and China. China quickly sues for peace between itself and the U.S. The two nations are not evenly matched in terms of military power. While China maintains an advantage in the Pacific, the U.S. military still outmatches its own. The longer the war goes on, the greater the disparity in losses will be between the two powers, with China inevitably suffering a complete military defeat. The U.S. not only has the superior forces, but
a complete military defeat, but the title is Why United States Won't Win World War III. Isn't that what he's talking about? He says the Chinese will have a complete military. This is one of the dumbest videos I've ever seen.
Also the superior tactical position, as it's able to shut down almost all of Chinese overseas trade, which means a massive reduction in Chinese GDP, as high as 35%. It is in China's best interest to end the war quickly, and with the reunification of Taiwan and world opinion turning against further violence, the U.S. is forced to accept a ceasefire. The overwhelming bolt-out-of-the-blue attack on U.S. forces in the Pacific, the loss of the Japanese support, and the swift surrender of Taiwan have all worked to strategically defeat the United States. It has not suffered a military defeat, but in the end, China has accomplished all of its strategic goals in the region, and the world now knows that Asia and the Pacific, the most economically important region in the world, belongs to it. The United States had just lost the third and shortest of world wars, a defeat that signals to many that China's rising dragon will be the one to shape the world for the century to come. Now go check out U.S. versus China. Who would win?
That's okay. I don't know if I would. Oh my goodness. So here's the thing. It's like, yeah, they could all play out that way. That is possible. But this channel's saying this as if it's already set in stone and fact. All of these details end the outcome of the war. It's kind of silly and crazy, but again, not impossible, I suppose. But the thing is, like, there's so many it's like trying to predict. Geez, I don't know. It's like trying to predict like what a tornado is gonna do. Like tornadoes just can move anywhere at any point. Like if you're trying to pinpoint exactly the tornado is gonna go exactly here and here and here, it's just like crazy madness. It's chaos. That's what war is. Um, there's so many factors that play into it. So I would say the biggest factor is we don't really know like the capacity. We don't know what secret weapons these countries may have and um, secret plans. Uh, I know that America. This came out, I believe, with the. It was either WikiLeaks or was it with Edward Snowden that America had put bombs in a lot of the infrastructure of Japan, like in the I think like bridges and things like that, so that if they were to turn against America and ally with China, then America would like blow up a bunch of critical infrastructure. Um, so that was one secret that got out, but they said that they got rid of all that stuff, but that's to me that's really not cool. But besides the point, not cool to say the least. Uh, I'm sure they have other plans, you know, to if that the public doesn't know. So that's kind of silly. But anyway, yeah. Thanks for watching. Have a good one. Like, comment, and subscribe if you want. But if not, that's cool. And take care.